Hi there. I'd like to preface this discussion by reciting a very important spiritual formula, if you like. I just want to say that God is love, but love is not God. So think about that one. Now, I had actually a bit of difficulty with this video because there is only one word, love, in the English language, which is a catch-all noun or verb. But in ancient Greek times, love was actually analysed, and there were different types of love. So it made life much less confusing because you could use a different word to define a different category or type of love, which I think is really, really interesting. In fact, there are many words in English for anger, interestingly enough, but there are not many words for love, which is also interesting. Well, the first one will start at the top of the pentagram, which actually has become a little bit of a hexagram due to the administrative error. We start at the top, which is the spirit, ether. And of course, I put agape at this point, which is the love for the divine. And certainly the ancient Greeks used to use this word to describe a love for the divine, a reverence for the divine, an acknowledgement of the divine, but it also, interestingly enough, crosses over from ancient Greece to early Christianity as well. And Thomas Aquinas has a really interesting definition of agape, which he says the wish to bring out the good of another person, or to encourage the good in another person, or to believe in the good of another person. I am my brother's keeper, and which is really fascinating, as if like the moral welfare of your brother or your sister is of divine concern, and you should be concerned about the moral welfare of another person that you know, or even a person that you don't really know, say a person of an institution or government, and you should be concerned that they are behaving morally, and that this has a divine significance, a divine value. Very interesting there from Thomas Aquinas. It's an unconditional love for God, obviously, but it's all in the sense that St. Paul says everything God sends is welcome. But of course, the question arises, which God is sending you all the things? But in a way, St. Paul actually goes beyond that. He says it doesn't really, in a way, it doesn't matter whether it's a demiurge or whatever deity is sending you, whatever they are sending you, because it's all a blessing, which is another way of looking at the trials of this world, is that they are a blessing and not a curse, in actual fact. So it's also a love of a parent for children, for their children. So obviously you get this strong metaphor, strong language in the religions of the book, as God the Father, and we are the children of God the Father, and He loves us. There's also love between spouses as well, between husband and wife, between two partners, as one should say, politically correct, to be politically correct now. And of course, I think it's Valentius, the Gnostic father, who talks, well, some of the Gospels of Valentian Gospels talk about use language of pairs, language of the coming together, the bride and the bridegroom, and all this. So that's part of agape as well. So it's a very powerful, mystical love, as a spiritual quality to it, a quality belonging to the ether, somewhat indefinable, I suppose, really, and very mysterious, but very powerful. I mean, on some level or another, you are detecting agape and the function of agape and the effects of agape. And you're also attempting to cultivate agape as far as you understand the word to be. So that's very interesting. And then we're going sort of anti-clockwise. Sorge or Sorge. This is, I always understood to be a love for the teacher, but it's also in the sense of putting up with the tyrant as well. So there's a love for the tyrant in the sense that you're just putting up with the fact that you're under a tyranny, and you just have to obey the rules of this tyrant and do as you're told, and then all will be well. It's a sort of, I suppose it's a bit like the kind of love, well, also love for the country, my country, right or wrong, a sort of North Korean idea that you've got this God figure who is the chairman of the Workers' Party, Kim Jong-il, and you've just got to do as to criticize him is to criticize yourself, as they say. You've just got to be obedient to the Communist Party, and all will be well. So there's a love there for the tyrant. There's a love there, and I suppose there's a love and forgiveness of the demiurge as well coming into this. That we are where we are. We are in the here and now, and the demiurge controls everything, controls the matrix. So in a sense, there's a kind of acceptance there, as well as a desire for transcendence, which is a very interesting polarity, really. I think, anyway. So that's kind of, and there's also a fear of God, which it means respect. So you respect God, you respect the elements, respect the forces of nature, you respect the dualistic world and the dualisms, you respect the adversarial spirit, I suppose, which is in all things as well, which I've referred to on this channel. And so you fear authority, you have respect for it. So Storge is certainly a very, and I ascribed it to air in the sense of obedience to the teacher. The teacher teaches you, gives you knowledge, gives you facts and figures and statistics, and you have to obey the teacher. You have to acknowledge the teacher is a greater intellect than your own, and you have to submit yourself to a power greater and other than yourself, you see, which is the power of the guru, the power of the teacher, the Mahaguru, perhaps God himself, or some angel or something like, or the Holy Spirit. So there is a submission, which nevertheless, as St. Paul says, is really a liberation. So by being submissive, by submitting to a power greater than yourself, you are actually liberating yourself from the chaos of yourself and aligning yourself to some sort of order. It's if you're like you're a pile of iron filings, and then someone puts a magnet underneath you, and you line up like soldiers, tip to tail kind of thing. And that's very much like you have to align yourself to the intellect, to thinking, discursive thought. You can't. It's not emotions. You have to be obedient to rationality, empiricism, logical thought. Logical appreciation, open-mindedness, but also a wariness of deception as well. So you might have to put yourself under the submission of an academic institution that preserves the foundations of science and empiricism and logical, rational thought, and you might have to combine this with a spirituality, which isn't easy to come up with, to balance it all out, but you might have to. So I put that in the air portion of the pentagram, and then we go down to Xenia, and I put this with Earth because this is really simple. I say simple, but it's a simple virtue, which is being a good host and being a good guest. So this in ancient Greece was sort of love for guests. Putting on being a good host and being hospitable, and being hospitable, even, and being like the hospitals Um, and being like the being like the Knights Templars, that you protect people whilst they're guests and whilst they're under your protection. And my brain is slowly going. I'm just doing so many videos. So it's kind of simple, but it's kind of earthy. You're giving people a good time, really. But they're also being a good guest. You've got to love your host as much as your host loves you. So you should never refuse anything that your host gives you, for example. That's quite important. That's a show of love, of xenia towards your host, you see. And now we come down to philia. Actually, this philia is sort of in two parts. It should actually be up there with water, because it's all to do with emotions. But the general thing that's thought about philia is it's a love between family members and friends and a peer group, and it's a kind of expression of brotherly love. So it's a love that you get between members of a magical order or a Wiccan group or something like that, and bond. It's a feeling of being bonded to somebody, like-minded people. Again, you're all singing from the same hymn sheet. You're all looking at the world more or less in a united way. Not so that individuality is crushed, but as general sort of peer group agreement on reality and definition, which is kind of nice. But there's also this ideal philemania, which is this is in two parts at least. One is egotism. That's vanity, and all is vanity. And egotism is very subtle because it's to do with spiritual pride as well, which is a very difficult thing to guard against and very easy to fall into. We all do it. So the philemania is like this is a very, very philiatia, not philemania. What am I talking about? And so this is kind of self-love. There's also I have in my mind here a love for the things that are necessary. So it's a pursuit of happiness kind of thing. We have certain needs, certain fundamental needs which are necessary for our well-being. And we should love them, and we should bring them into manifestation, and we should honour those necessary desires, but not necessary evils. They should be within the bounds of propriety. And then finally, there's a thing called self-compassion, which is an idea in ancient Greek philosophy, which is lovely, really. It's a sort of self-love, it's self-forgiveness. It's giving yourself a break, really, and forgiving yourself for your trespasses as you forgive others that trespass against you. So that's very powerful, philia, very powerful love, but emotional, very emotional. So I put it in the water. And down here for intuition, I put eros, which is not just sexual love or sexual passion. Again, this is all to do with this principle of sanctification, because it follows from what Plato thought, that you could take eros and you could de-sexify it in a way. You could take sex out of the equation, and then it was like an objective appreciation of beauty and the form of beauty. And the forms, of course, are in heaven. They are in the realm, the supernal triad, the supernal realms. That's where non-dualistic beauty and appreciation for beauty, hence Platonic love, so is actually concentrated or located or focused on, you see. So you have this thing of sanctification, also of sexual attraction as well. And the idea that in sex magic or tantric magic, the actual passion to take somebody is rarefied, and a gross sexuality is vivified and made whole or made part of oneness, made conscious. It's not just an unconscious sexual drive, it's a conscious sexual drive. So that's the idea of eros being redeemed and being made something other than it is. And I put that in fire because also you have an intuitive knowledge that grows out of the almost erotic attraction to deity. I mean, there's an intensity there. There's an attraction for God. I love you, God. The four holy words, and it's almost like there's a sexual attraction, which is also made. It becomes an intuitive experience. It's very hard to explain, really. I suppose it's an appreciation for art, to art magica, really. That's all you can say about eros. But it's an interesting idea that you take something that could be called animal, and you take out the description of animal and you replace it with divine, and suddenly you see eros in a different light altogether. Very interesting that. So that's really all the parts of love, or the definitions of love that I've come across. The ancient Greeks had, as far as I understand it, and it's very it's a powerful thing, because once you define these different loves, you can also define yourself in relation to love. You can say, well, which love am I experiencing? Which love am I cultivating? Am I cultivating agape, or is it something more like philia, or even storge? So you can look at Xenia as well, and think, am I being a loving host? Am I being a loving guest? So it brings you into self-awareness, into doing things consciously, going to see somebody in a conscious way, in the service of love and the divine, rather than just being a guest in someone's house. So it becomes very important to become a guest in someone's house. And indeed, I suppose when we're all transformed into the supernal worlds, then God will have love for us, as He is the host of us, and we'll have love for Him, because we are well, we're not just guests. Actually, we go from guest, in fact, to family. So we actually do go from xenia to philia, in actual fact. And all this takes place under agape. So, of course, then you can see that there are a lot of different combinations of these different types of love possible. And one goes from one type of love to the other in a kind of a seamless garment of consciousness. Always remembering, of course, as I started this lecture, that God is love, but love is not God.